computer. Hi, everybody. I'm Renelle Delmont. I have a website, LindberghKidnappingHoax.com, and it's my pleasure to speak with Lise Pearlman and her daughter, Jamie Benvenutto. They're in California. I'm in Florida. Here is the book of the century, suspect number one, The Man Who Got Away. And the man who got away is, of course, Charles Lindbergh, if you know my website. 20 years ago, you couldn't say this without people going nuts. But now, Lise Pearlman has written an incredible book that just won the Excellent Book Award for True Crime. Did I get it right this time?
Book Excellence Award, but yes,
Book Excellence Award. It's a mouthful. So, Lisa, my question to you, what people would like to know is, after publication of this book last September, are there things that you've discovered that you wanted, that you feel now should have been either corrected or included in?
Well, in October, the publisher did publish a corrected copy of the book so that it's incorporated now. Because I got some feedback from some early readers, people who contributed or follow your website, people who contributed or follow Michael Melsky's website. And some corrections needed to be made, and I'm happy to do that because I want it to be as accurate as possible. And some things just made me want to explain a little better what I already had because there was some confusion over it. I know one correction I made was at your instigation, that it wasn't a nonstop flight across country when Anne was pregnant. There was one stop to refuel in the Midwest. But there are some that I considered highly significant. And one of them was when I spoke with Wayne or had emails back and forth with Wayne McDaniel. He had thought that there was no credible evidence that Lindbergh left the premises of the farmhouse during the week of March 7 through 11. When the reporters had reported, who were swarming all over, had reported that he had left the house multiple times, disguised as a trooper. And he based that on some documentation of reports by Condon, who arrived on Wednesday night, I think, and left on Thursday at the farmhouse. On report by Mickey Rossner, and who said that on Tuesday, Lindbergh and Breckenridge were there all day. So that was contrary. And then one other, which was the report of an official report by, I think it was Frank Kelly as a trooper, that Lindbergh had called him to the farmhouse at 5 a.m. on Tuesday to receive ransom note number 3 in the envelope it came in, to test it for fingerprints, and they found none. And so that was what he thought refuted the idea that there were periods of time that overlapped with that the reporters had reported him AWOL.
Mm-hmm.
And I checked it out, and I looked at Rossner's lengthy kind of draft of a manuscript that he never published, which is at the New Jersey State Police Museum. And I found that there were some major gaps that he had in his reporting. For example, he said that on Monday, I think it was Monday afternoon, he spent, no, I'm sorry, Tuesday afternoon, he decided to go shopping because he spent all his time at the farmhouse for a while, and he needed some clothes and maybe toothbrush or whatever. And so he'd gone to Princeton for the whole afternoon on Tuesday. Well, you can't report on Lindbergh's presence or absence if you weren't there. The other thing he said was that he spent most of his time that week manning the telephones, because they put in a number of new telephones in the living room, and there were lots of people calling and police calling and whatever. And he pretended to be a secretary for various people. He was Lindbergh's secretary, he was Breckenridge's secretary, he was Mrs. Morrow's secretary, and was answering the phones. Well, if he's inside answering the phones in the living room all morning long, he still doesn't know whether Lindbergh and Breckenridge are on the premises somewhere else. So that
Wait. We lost you for a second. It'll come back. It'll come back. Takes a second before the voice comes back. If anybody knows the technology behind why. There
it's
we
not
go.
working.
Yeah, I think we'll just have to reschedule. I'm sorry. We have to figure out what's going on.
Well,
Yeah.
okay,
think-
so we should do it at another time.
Another
Yeah,
day,
I
another
think
time.
if you want to record it, we would have to. I mean, because it's interrupted
Just-
so much.
Just finish the thought, because I could
Okay.
put this segment up. Just finish the thought
Okay.
about Thayer. It's important.
Well, this wasn't Thayer, this was actually Rossner, but Thayer figures into it also.
Rossner, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But Thayer too. yes.
Rossner put in his diary that he was using as a, I guess, draft manuscript for that spring, that he had met with, that on Monday he was answering the phones, and Breckenridge came running in and said, I just got a call from my associate Phelan that he received at my office in New York, this ransom note number 3, which they were expecting since Sunday, because on Sunday there was a seance at which Breckenridge was told expect something to come. And so apparently, according to Breckenridge, that was read to him over the telephone by Phelan, and that Phelan was going to come down that afternoon with the ransom note and the envelope to deliver it so they could respond. And Rossner said that's what happened, and that evening he drafted a response that Breckenridge and Lindbergh approved, and then he sent somebody up to New York to have it at the newspaper, which was requested in the ransom demand that had the specifics about which newspaper to use, the American Journal, and to get it there by 11 o'clock at his request, in order to be in the newspapers the following morning. And so that's what he said happened. And he said that the contents of it about father and mother, and we received your note on the 4th and all of that, were approved by Breckenridge and Lindbergh. Well, there's a serious problem with that. It did appear the next morning in the American Journal, in the first edition after midnight,
New York
second edition.
American.
I'm sorry, New York American. It's also later called American Journal.
Right, it changed names, right.
Changed names.
Right.
But in any event, he got it published. It was there. We've seen it. It's in the Library of Congress. The problem with all of that is that in evidence against Hauptmann in 1935 was the original envelope and the original ransom note. Okay. The envelope was postmarked Monday at 1 p.m. And according to Walsh, who was a key figure in the investigation, it was not received until Tuesday at Breckenridge's office. So they wrote a response before the note was received.
Oh, I love this. Oh,
Yeah.
this is too
Which is
fantastic.
evidence of conspiracy.
I love it.
To compound that evidence is something Thayer wrote in his own notes on Sunday, the same day as the seance. He was staying at the farmhouse also. And if you go, I think it's either Georgetown or Library of Congress has Thayer's papers.
Yeah, I've been there.
And he wrote that Lindbergh was on the phone because Phelan called on Sunday evening, early Sunday evening. And when Phelan called on early Sunday evening, they were discussing the contents of ransom note number 3. And Thayer did not realize the significance of that. And then he said that Lindbergh acted kind of strangely after that. He started playing more practical jokes on people. But here is Thayer referring to the contents of that note being referred to on Sunday evening directly to Lindbergh. On Monday, then Breckenridge comes running into Rossner and pretends, apparently, that he just got a call from Phelan about receiving this note in the mail,
Right.
when it had already been communicated to Lindbergh the day before And it wasn't actually received until Tuesday. There was a big conference, a confidential conference between the New Jersey police, Schwarzkopf and Walsh were part of it, and the FBI from New York, or the Bureau at that time from New York, and other federal officials on May 17 or 18, I think it was the 18th, less than a week after the body was found of the little boy. And at that conference, which they had a stenographer taking all the notes, Walsh reported to them about ransom note number 3 and said it was received in the mail on Tuesday at Breckenridge's office. So you've got all of that. We did not know that before. I found that out by going into it. The other thing is that there were multiple reporters who noticed Lindbergh leaving, and apparently their source were troopers.
Right.
And a combination of reasons you knew that. The troopers were talking to the newspaper people. But in addition to that, by Friday of that week, Lindbergh made sure that Schwarzkopf got rid of all the troopers who'd been there all along and replaced them with some who had no knowledge of anything prior. So that switch happened by the end of that week. And one of them on Monday a Monday evening apparently, or Tuesday, had reported to his superiors that someone stole his cap and his jacket from the hook by the kitchen in Lindbergh's house, and his superior told him to shut up and don't worry about it, essentially. And that was reported by the reporter. And one of the reporters won a Pulitzer, I think it was, for his reporting on the kidnapping that week. So it wasn't as if these are just sensationalist accounts. These were serious newspaper people, and many of them were reporting Lindbergh left. And one of the things that the main reporter said was that Lindbergh almost mowed down 2 guards at the station, the little guard station at the end of the driveway as he was leaving on Monday night at 11. Well, that could have only come from the guards. And they said they jumped out of the way because they didn't know who was in it, but they saw what he was wearing. And then later, one guard said that as far as he knew, that was Lindbergh. So there's a lot of corroboration of that. And so he was missing from Monday night through to Tuesday morning. Now, that's where Kelly's report comes in. Kelly says in a backdated report, and the reason you know it's backdated is because it refers to events that happened after that date, as well as on that date.
Oh, sound. The sound stopped. I can see you, but I cannot hear you. If anybody knows why, let me know, because this is too. There you go. There you go.
Oh, we go. Anyway, Kelly reported in a backdated report that referred to events that occurred later, as well as on the morning of March 8th, that he was summoned from Skillman Village, where they were boarding a number of the troopers, to the Lindbergh farmhouse at 5 a.m. And that when he got there, Lindbergh handed him the envelope and note to have it tested for fingerprints.
Mm-hmm.
And he found none. Well, this report was contrary to what Walsh reported to the Bureau in their formal report in May. Because in that report, they said it wasn't received in the mail until Tuesday during the day in New York. So it couldn't be handed to this guy at 5 a.m. on Tuesday in New Jersey.
So he was
so there's that. I think
was covering. Yeah.
I think he was giving Lindbergh an alibi to have been at home at 5 a.m. His wife couldn't give him that alibi because he told her Monday night that he was spending the night in Breckenridge's room, and instead he had Breckenridge's wife, Aida, stay with his wife. And she wrote that in her diary. She wrote that in her diary. So she didn't see him. She said she hardly saw him all week.
Right.
And she just assumed he was holed up with detectives. So that gave Lindbergh an alibi for Tuesday morning, but it was contradicted by not only what Walsh told the Bureau in May, as what happened with Schwarzkopf's blessing because he was present, but also what was the evidence put on against Hauptmann, because at the trial, they indicated that it was received on Tuesday, that it was mailed on Monday, and they put that in. What they left out was Rossner's instructions on Monday night of the answer to that. They didn't put that in, which is really remarkable, because when Condon later put in instructions of a response to appear in the newspaper, when he started being the go-between, they put that in evidence against Hauptmann.
They didn't put all
But
the
they
evidence.
left out the one that Rossner did, because the newspapers might have figured out that the response was actually inserted
Before-
before the ransom note was, the demand was received.
I just want to clarify something. They put in the orders that were made for the New York American, but they didn't put any of the evidence in about the Brooklyn Home News, the Bronx Home News,
No,
which, no, they didn't put any of the orders for the messages that went in the Bronx Home News. And they were putting the same ad in both papers, but they were putting them in the Bronx Home News before the New York American.
Journal,
Well,
American
it
Journal.
depends on
Yeah.
which ones you're referring to. The very first one Condon did is not what she's talking about, but this is
Right.
very interesting. What she is talking about is that the note that came with the baby's sleeping suit,
Right,
he testified, Condon, similarly to Breckenridge, that it was that the response to that was given to the newspaper on the 19th or 20th, and that it was on the 17th that they met, and that Lindbergh, well, they met late on the night of the 16th at his home, and Lindbergh didn't arrive until early morning on the 17th.
right.
And that was when he said they opened it up, and that's when they found the matching, that it was, that he said it was his
Sleeping.
kid's sleeping suit.
And instructions to respond.
And their instructions to respond. The problem with that is that the response to the
Sleeping suit.
kidnappers' demand that came with the sleeping suit, in the trial, they said that it was prepared and sent to the newspaper
On the
on the 19th for publication on the 20th
for the New York American.
for the New York American.
Right,
They didn't say that the identical response was published on during the day on the 17th, having been placed on the 16th
What?
by somebody
in the Bronx Home News.
in the Bronx Home
In the
News.
Bronx Home News.
And it was reported in other newspapers that they saw that ad and they figured out that it had something to do with Lindbergh on the 17th.
but the editor of the Bronx Home News was in Jaffsey's house. His name is Coleman, Gregory Coleman. He's the publisher of the, I don't know if he was
dates are
there
wrong.
with the sleeping suit, but I'm just saying that.
Right, but the dates were wrong.
Mentioning it. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Of course,
He
it's
testified
shocking.
to false dates
Right,
that
right.
were contrary to already published newspaper articles about their response or including their response. So you've got that as well. So you've got Lindbergh and Breckenridge responding to ransom note number 3 before it was received. And talking about it on the telephone on Sunday before it was received, and telling Rossner that it had just been received Monday at noon when that was impossible. That the envelope at trial, which is still something they posted on the website for the museum, shows very clearly that it was postmarked in New York at 1 p.m. On Monday.
On Monday, yeah.
So at noon on Monday for receipt, it was totally impossible.
So how can we look at the investigation by the police? Forget about Lindbergh, but Schwarzkopf, were they that dumb? They must have known Schwarzkopf. Were they covering for Lindbergh by that time? They had to have been, some of them.
I think they were covering for anything that did not point to Hauptmann. And for a couple of reasons.
Right.
One, they had been ridiculed for the way they handled the investigation. And two, they believed, I think, that Hauptmann had to be part of the scheme. And as far as they were concerned, if he was part of the scheme, you might as well blame the whole thing on him
Right.
and make it a tidy package.
Well, I
Right.
think there's other things too, and that is Joe Walsh, who was, is that Joe Walsh or Walsh? Gary
Walsh,
Walsh.
I don't remember.
He was reported as saying that Lindbergh was just too big to bring down. So I think some troopers knew. I think some troopers knew at the time, and they were doing what they could to cover up any
Embarrassed.
guilt on the part of Lindbergh and Breckinridge that didn't match their story. I think they were in part trying to cover up for them because they knew something was going on, but they didn't have the authority to say anything because Lindbergh was the appointed head of the investigation by the governor.
And it was way too powerful. And there were others who wrote to Governor Hauptmann later who were very afraid of coming forward. Like Squire Johnson was one. He knew that the police were lying. He told that to the governor, but he wasn't going to come forward and testify because his job was on the line, and you're still in the middle of the Depression.
Right.
And you could see that some of them were totally intimidated out of coming forward. So there was that, but I don't believe the police knew the full extent of Lindbergh's involvement or Breckinridge's. They knew some things. I also don't think that the men who I believe were hired by Lindbergh to pretend to be a gang, the ones who came early and crossed the railroad tracks several times so they'd be noticed, or ostentatiously changed a tire so that the New York plates in this small town would be noticed. All of that was to put on a show of a gang so that people, the news people would be misled. I don't think they knew what really was going on. They knew they were hired to do that.
Right.
So I think it was a need to know basis, and very few people knew the full extent of anything.
Right.
But the police did know. The head of the, I'm trying to remember the name of the captain who was in charge at the house, Lamb. Captain Lamb knew Lindbergh was up to something. And it may have been that he believed Lindbergh was trying to negotiate his son's return in private, and that it was for a good reason that he was sneaking off. But he definitely covered for him.
Yeah, you made a good point, because people who did cover for Lindbergh might have been doing it out of humanitarian values or moral values. I don't know how, speaking of morality, Alexis Carrel was a Roman Catholic. He believed in psychic phenomenon and all kinds of stuff that Catholicism disapproves of. A true Catholic doesn't believe in dowsing for whatever. It's not right. It's an enemy of all religion, psychic, all of these woo-woo ideas are actually enemies of all the religions. They disapprove of it. So how in the world did someone like Alexis Carrel, who claimed to be so religious, how did he do what he did with Lindbergh? And how does this is not a question you can answer, I can answer, the man in the moon can't answer it. It's just something I think about, because your book, I've said this before, I've always been suspicious of Carrel because of that letter that you mentioned in Friedman's book. That blew me away, just as it did you. Oh, your voice is gone. Yeah, your voice is gone. You can't hear me? Oh, okay. Okay, so maybe, hello? Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Oh, there we go. There we go. So my question cannot be answered, but about the religious aspect of a man who does these despicable.
Well, I think that his Catholicism did not trump his eugenics, a devotion to eugenics, and his assumption that he could figure out the experiments that would lead to immortality.
Yeah.
which is not, based on religion, but based on science.
Well,
Right.
And so he was totally devoted to that, and he wanted to create essentially a master race, and that's what appealed to Hitler about Carrel's book. And they made it mandatory reading in the Vichy government during World War II.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
So Carrel was given a lot of money in the Vichy government when he went there to create an institute of science. And he was recording all of the people and their ethnicity and their number of children, how they had any that were disabled, things like that. But he was being encouraged to develop what he'd written about in 1935.
Right.
And in fact, when Hitler's own doctor was tried at Nuremberg after the war, his defense was in part, I was only doing what Carrel recommended. And that didn't help him. He was convicted and executed, but that was true that Carrel had said that, the weak infants should be left to die, that criminals should be gassed to death, that the mentally ill don't deserve to live, and that you should create this gene pool that was the more worthy, in his view, people in the world, and that would be the future.
Right. Yeah.
So he had those views that are not, that's not a Catholic view.
No, but for somebody who wrote about religion, I mean, Carrel not only wrote scientific essays, but he wrote about Lourdes, his trip to Lourdes,
Right.
And he was convinced that there was something there with the water, with the spring that cured people. And for this, he was ostracized by his fellow scientists.
Well, both. He was ostracized by the scientists, but he also was rejected by people of faith, because he backtracked on that and said, well, something happened. I don't know what. I don't believe it proved there was a miracle. So he tried to be somewhere in between, and he lost credit with both, which is why he left France and went to Canada.
Right, right. But it's a stunning book that you've written. And so the new things that you've discovered are in the October.
Yes, they are. And there's some others too. And maybe we don't have time to talk about that today, but there are a few other things that we discovered since, and they all confirm what I already had. That I have not found anything inconsistent with my theory and the evidence that we have previously uncovered. So
the objection that Wayne McDaniel wrote to you about, that Lindbergh could not have been away because Jaffe was there and this one was there.
Well, he'd have to speak for himself, but I think I convinced him otherwise.
Oh, you did? Good.
Because there was just too much evidence, especially when you take it apart step by step. Kelly could not have been telling the truth. And it was inconsistent with what their own superiors had written, and it was clearly backdated. And you've got the evidence that was put into the trial about when that was mailed and when it was received. So it didn't match up.
Right. And there are so many reports that he was out. He was running away from what you refer to as the farmhouse. So
that's what he called it, essentially. I mean, they didn't, Highfields was not a name attributed to it until 1933.
Right.
But when they formed a company, they were giving it to the state for purpose of a scientific institute that he and Carrel eventually planned to put an operation there together with Skillman Village. But at the point at which he gave it to him in 33, it was just for child welfare in some unspecified way. And I think his wife wanted to call it Highfields. He had a different proposed name that they didn't use.
Do you know that name? Because she mentions that it's a secret name, and she doesn't say what the secret.
Secret. It's in a letter.
The original name that Lindbergh was going to call it, because it was in the original Papers of Incorporation, was Sourland Mountain Farm Incorporated. That's what he was going to call it.
Sourland Mountain Farm Incorporated?
That's what it was going to be called.
R-
And then
Yeah.
and
That's
he was
in,
that was what the school was going to be called. The facility, the institute was going to be called. And he changed it because in the communication and that original Papers of Incorporation is in the Abraham Flexner files at Library of Congress, which is where we found that.
because he was on the board.
Because he
Flexner
was on the board. And Abraham Flexner said that name is kind of dour sounding. You should pick something happier. So they went with Highfields.
And it may have been Anne who suggested Highfields.
Well,
We don't know.
well, the thing is, High, H-I or H-I-G-H, we don't know
Maybe.
what it
yeah.
was for, was Charlie's nickname for Lindbergh.
The toddler's nickname for his dad.
The toddler's nickname for his dad. And so some people thought he was saying high as in high up or high as in H-I, but that's probably where the name Highfields came from, is because it had meaning, personal meaning to Anne from both Charlie and Lindbergh, because High was Charlie's nickname for his dad. So that's probably where Highfields came from.
Okay, well, she says it's a secret and she doesn't explain what it is, but you've given a great explanation.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other places in her book where she says the baby calls him High. I forgot the reason why the baby called his father High.
We don't know. I mean, the only thing we can think of is maybe he saw them fly an airplane, and he saw them high up in the air, or we don't know.
Well, we do know that he called his grandmother T because she gave him golf tees to play with. So who knows what the significance was of High.
Yeah.
Cute.
I have
He's cute.
Okay.
I've got to.
I know, and this has been difficult for all of us with the sound going.
The sound, unfortunately, this is an older building and it has stucco, and sometimes that causes problems with the computer Wi-Fi, but not all the time. So I don't know. But yes, there were other things that changed, and one of them was Dr. Speth found something new that
something that's not in his report.
It's in the October, it's in the corrections, because there was an added paragraph in Act 5, Chapter 5, near the beginning, which explains the hole behind the ear.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a big thing to explain.
Yeah.
Tell me
Well,
right away.
it's just his hypothesis.
Oh.
Okay. But nobody had done that before. And the hypothesis to me is very credible. And that is that the doctor who wrote up the autopsy, Dr. Mitchell, originally thought it was a bullet hole because it was rounded and not jagged. And he stuck with that theory for a while. Well, there's another explanation for a rounded hole that looks like a bullet hole, and that is a drill.
Right.
And Dr. Speth believes that a drill was used on the baby before he died to drill a hole behind his ear in order to drain hydrocephalic fluid. And the reason he believes that is very possible is that an operation of that identical type was done on an infant by a neurosurgeon in 1908 under Dr. Carrel's tutelage. He had seen that done with a similar experiment done with a dog the year before. And so he tried that. The child did not live very long, but the idea was to drill a hole and then to use a segment of a vein or artery to drain the fluid from through that hole. And that's explained in an article that was written in 2010, the historical article about that first attempt at an operation to relieve a hydrocephalic baby.
Oh, we lost your sound. Lost your sound. There we go again. Okay, it's going to come back in a second because Lisa froze up.
In any
Yeah.
event, here we go. In any event, the operation to relieve that fluid that was on the brain worked for a little bit, but then the child died, the baby. And no one had successfully replicated that experiment up past 1932. So if Carrel had a hydrocephalic toddler to work with, he would have been tempted most likely to replicate it, and that could easily explain a rounded hole that looked like a bullet hole behind the ear.
Right.
So that's Dr. Speth's guess, that is an alternate explanation that is more likely perhaps than any other. But you can't know. The other thing is that Dr. Carrel's wife came to America in February of 1932, and she was a nurse. She was a surgical nurse,
Mhm.
and it's very possible that she aided in that operation. And both of them, both one for hydrocephalus and then for vivisection. It's possible.
Everything is possible, but you've broken through with Carrel. I've always suspected him, and you've done an amazing piece of work in your investigation.
Well, thank you. The thing that's most amazing to me is why people don't accept that as likely. When Carrel wrote a book with Lindbergh in 38 saying, yes, I have done experiments that involve vivisection, essentially, and I recommend that others do similar research.
Right.
We're at the beginning stages. I mean, there are sentences that discuss that. There are a list of like 36 experiments. 27 of them say they were of animals, and 9 of them are silent as to what the source was. But then he writes a chapter that says this is how to for humans, and human arteries are thicker than animal. I mean, it's just,
Right.
it's there. It's in his
Right.
writings. And if you go to his diary, which his
Mm. The sound is gone again. Ay. We're in trouble with this recording. All right. We're going to have to do Lisa's interview
Right.
at another time.
at another
Okay.
time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But there's a lot to the story.
There's so much to this. I'm just fascinated. I'm sure anybody watching this interview, they're going to be blown away.
Okay, well, maybe we'll have to redo it. I'm sorry, we haven't
Yeah.
figured out how to make it smooth.
I know. Maybe someone can help us with the technology, give us advice. So
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we've tried here on our own, but
it may also be just the time of the day, because sometimes too many people are doing Zoom. It isn't the internet so much as it is the traffic on Zoom.
volume traffic, yeah.
Right. And people are meeting with their families. So let's, is there anything, you want to say something quick and we'll say goodbye?
Well, I'm delighted to be able to speak with you about this. There were a number of years, I will say, that I put this project aside because I found it so horrific. I didn't even want to read Friedman's book, but then it turned out he thought that the kidnapping was something separate, and he described these horrible experiments with cats. And it never occurred to him that there might have been some human experiments, and yet it's in the book. It's in their 1938 book.
I know. It shocked me that he didn't go there. After
Right.
inserting that letter and knowing what
Right.
he must have known, he didn't go there, which leads me to think that he was, how can I say, controlled or stifled in some way,
Intimidated perhaps, or something.
intimidated for some reason.
It's odd to me also that I thought something would be there, and it wasn't. And he just said, well, looking at that letter, maybe they planned it for the future, because he saw what it meant, that it
Right.
would be vivisection. And he said, oh, well, maybe that was something that's going to happen in the future. After he wrote that, and after Joyce, what's her last name?
Milton, Joyce Milton.
Milton, Joyce Milton, also wrote about that same letter. It disappeared from the Georgetown Library. It's not
Right.
there anymore.
Right. You know what else disappeared? Since he wrote that, his book, because I looked at my notes, my photographs of Carrel's papers, the condolence letter that Carrel sent Lindbergh is missing. It's not there. Somebody's been tampering with Carrel's papers. And it couldn't be Durkin because he died before the letter disappeared. So someone else, I'll explain this some other time, but someone else besides Father Durkin, because he was dead by 2003 and Friedman's book was 2006 and he saw it. And when I went there 5 years ago, the letter, everything was missing with little scraps of paper saying, this was a condolence letter to Lindbergh. Things
Well,
have been tampered.
my understanding is when I went to the Rockefeller Institute, that they have listed on their website some documentation of work by Carrel with Lindbergh, which could only be joint experiments, that you had to get their lawyer's permission to view, and I was never given that permission, so that it still may exist, that there's some evidence there that people don't have access to, or at least I was
Somebody's
not allowed
covering
access
up
to.
there. Somebody's fooling around with the Carrel archive. I'm sure of it because of what I saw. Everything's missing. Little scrap.
Well, one of the
pieces.
things about Carrel is that he was a dedicated scientist. So that meant that he had the latest equipment for making movies of his experiments and showing some of that at conferences. He had detailed notes about all his experiments because he wanted other doctors and researchers to replicate what he did. And Lindbergh made a point when Carrel died of going around with the widow. And then a lot of stuff seemed to have disappeared.
Yes,
All that film footage, is gone or it's hidden. I don't know which, but we know he got the expensive equipment. We know they used that equipment, and yet where is the footage of all this? Where are the notes? Now, every once in a while they slip up, I think, because Jamie found, for example, a note card that talked about a human experiment that Carrel had written, and we also put in the book a photo of the chicken embryo experiment. It wasn't of the experiment itself, but of a newspaper write-up on its 20th anniversary. And he crossed out chicken and put human. Apparently it was his handwriting because it was in his private files at Georgetown. So you can see that in my book. It's got chicken crossed out and human written in.
I have to look at that. I somehow missed it.
So and you also have in his private files a retyped version of the diet on which little Charlie was being fed every day, including his medicine, that was published in the newspapers. Why did Carrel have it retyped and put in his private files?
You found that?
Yeah, that's in there too.
Oh, I missed that.
We have a photo of both of those. It's
Well,
in
what was he doing? That's why, when you read the average book about the kidnapping, Carrel is nowhere. He's not involved anywhere, which is the most suspicious thing of all. That's why I went to Georgetown. But you've uncovered all the implications of a very nasty, devious, horrific thing of a father experimenting on his child, doing away with him for whatever reason. And
not telling his wife. I mean, misleading her. Part of it, big part of this was to make sure she didn't understand what was going on, as well as his mother-in-law, as well as the public. And it worked. If that's what happened, it worked.
Yeah, somebody, a viewer on one of the other videos that I made, commented the other day, a very long comment about Anne's involvement in all of this. And so I wanted to ask you if the sound had stayed maybe this should be saved for another time, but you don't think Anne, there are people who believe that Anne was involved knowingly, willingly, whatever. I don't go there. I can't imagine it, but I don't see any reason to believe that she knew what was going on.
I
So-
think she, at some level, she had at least a subconscious recognition that he was involved. And I'll tell you why, because she was honest about testifying that the ransom note was not on the windowsill when she was in there, right after the baby
Right.
supposedly disappeared, and yet it was found a little later. I think that he was so controlling that she didn't necessarily process everything she knew.
Mm.
But she had some indication. She was a very sharp observer. And that's one of the reasons, I believe, the main reason, that when he wrote his autobiography of values, he excluded her from editing any of it, because she would have corrected a lot of what he wrote. I mean, he didn't write very much about little Charlie and the investigation and his death. He only, like, 13 paragraphs out of a very thick book. But what he wrote was almost all lies or distortions. And she would have caught him out on that. He doesn't even mention Betty Gow being there.
Mm.
And of course, Betty Gow accused him first thing of taking the kid as a joke.
Right.
So, and he doesn't mention the man at the end of the driveway in the car that Lupika saw, the one with a ladder in it. It's not even mentioned at all. And then the man existed. The police investigated for a day and then stopped suddenly. Why is that not mentioned? Well, because I
Lost you. Oh, it's aggravating. It's coming back in a few seconds. She'll be back.
Bye.
Can you hear?
I've got
There
to
you
say
are.
goodbye.
Yeah, we got to say goodbye. We'll talk about it the next time, whatever.
Right.
So goodbye, Lisa.
Take
Can you
care.
hear me? Yeah, take care. Bye,
I
everybody.
hope you've had both of your shots.
Yeah, my
Good.
husband too. Yeah, be well.
Wonderful. All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.